Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Grab a spoon, because today we're diving into something you've eaten 1,000 times but probably never questioned: ice cream. This is a story with Persian desert engineers, Roman emperors, guild secrets, and a war that basically saved it. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because we do this every week with a different food. Also, like the video if you're a certified ice cream enjoyer. It genuinely helps the channel. Alright, let's rewind a few thousand years and find out where this all started. Let's go back. Not decades, millennia. Because before there was ice cream, there was just ice. And someone, somewhere, decided ice wasn't interesting enough on its own. Our first stop is China, around the 2nd century BC. Historical texts describe a mixture of milk and rice that was packed into snow and left to freeze, essentially the ancestor of what we'd now call a frozen dairy dessert. This wasn't a dessert for everyone. It was a luxury for royal courts, because getting your hands on snow in the middle of summer was, frankly, an engineering problem before it was a culinary one. And that engineering problem gets solved in a big way in Persia. The Persians developed something called a faluda, thin frozen noodles made from starch, soaked in a rosewater and fruit syrup. It's genuinely one of the oldest frozen desserts we still have a name for, and versions of it are still served in Iran today. Same dish, thousands of years later. But here's the real flex: the Persians weren't just melting snow and hoping for the best. They built yakshal, massive dome-shaped structures, some over 60 feet tall, made of a special heat-resistant mortar. Paired with badgers, wind-catching towers that funneled cool air down into underground storage chambers, a yakshal could keep ice frozen through the brutal heat of a Persian summer, in the desert, with zero electricity, thousands of years before refrigeration existed. Ice would be hauled down from nearby mountains in winter and stored underground, sometimes staying frozen well into the following summer. Then there's Alexander the Great, who, depending on which historian you believe, developed a genuine obsession with snow. Campaigning through Persia in the 4th century BC, he reportedly had runners dig trenches and pack them with snow and ice, then cover them with oak branches and animal skins for insulation, so his army could keep supplies cool, and so he could get his hands on ice mixed with honey and fruit juice. Whether that's fully accurate or partly legend, the pattern is clear. Even the most powerful man in the ancient world wanted his snow flavored. And the Romans took that idea and ran with it, literally. The Emperor Nero, in the 1st century AD, is said to have sent runners up into the Apennine Mountains to fetch snow, which was then rushed back to Rome and topped with honey, wine, and fruit pulp. Snow relay races, organized by an emperor, purely so he could have a cold dessert. That's the level of commitment we're talking about. So before ice cream was ice cream, it was a status symbol, something that required mountains, deserts, wind towers, and relay runners just to get a bite of. And that obsession with keeping things cold? That's exactly what sets up our next stop, where this secret starts to travel. So the ancient world had figured out how to get ice, now someone had to figure out what to actually do with it. And that leap happens in the Arab world. Between the 7th and 13th centuries, during the Islamic Golden Age, Arab chemists and cooks were doing something genuinely revolutionary: refining sugar into a stable, storable syrup. Before this, sweetness mostly came from honey or fruit, unpredictable, hard to control. Sugar syrup changed that. And with it came sharbat, chilled drinks made from fruit juice, flower extracts, and that refined sugar syrup, poured over crushed ice. The word itself is where we get sherbet and syrup in English. This wasn't just a regional treat, either. Trade routes carried both the sugar refining techniques and the drink itself across the Middle East, North Africa, and eventually into Europe through Sicily and Spain. Now, here's where we have to stop and debunk something. You've probably heard the story: Marco Polo travels to China in the 13th century, discovers ice cream, and brings the recipe back to Italy, single-handedly inventing gelato. It's a great story. It's also almost certainly false. There's no mention of frozen desserts anywhere in Marco Polo's actual travel writings. Historians have combed through his accounts, nothing. The myth seems to have been invented centuries later, likely as 20th-century marketing, possibly connected to an American ice cream trade publication looking for a good origin story. Frozen desserts were already well established in the Mediterranean world through Arab and Persian influence long before Marco Polo ever set foot on a boat. So, sorry, Marco. Great explorer. Not the ice cream guy. Which brings us to Italy's actual claim to fame. In Sicily, cooks were making sorbetto, ice harvested from Mount Etna, flavored with citrus and fruit syrups, using techniques passed down through generations of Arab-influenced Sicilian cuisine. Sicily had been under Arab rule for centuries, and that culinary DNA, the sugar syrups, the flavored ices, never left. You'll also hear another popular legend here, that Catherine de Medici brought ice cream to France in 1533 when she married the future King Henry II, supposedly hauling Italian chefs and frozen dessert recipes across the Alps. It's a charming story, and, like Marco Polo, mostly unsupported by actual historical evidence. There's no solid documentation of Catherine's chefs serving anything resembling ice cream at the French court. Historians now treat it as folklore that got attached to a famous name because it made for a better story than nobody really knows exactly who first served it where. So what's the real turning point? It's not a single genius or a single dramatic arrival. It's Italian ice makers treating their techniques like state secrets. By the 1600s, in cities like Naples and Florence, making flavored ices had become a genuine trade craft, and the people who knew how to do it guarded that knowledge fiercely. These weren't recipes you could just look up. Ice-making guilds required members to take oaths of secrecy. Getting caught leaking techniques could mean expulsion, or worse. This wasn't some cozy kitchen tradition passed between friends. It was closer to a guarded industry, where knowing how to freeze a sugar syrup smoothly, without it turning into a solid block of ice, was genuinely valuable intellectual property. And that secrecy is exactly why it took so long for ice cream to spread beyond Italy, and why, when it finally did, it caused a sensation. So Italy's ice makers were guarding their secrets like state treasure. But secrets have a habit of leaking, and once this one did, the dessert itself was about to change completely. Up until now, everything we've talked about, the Persian faluda, the Arab sharbat, Sicilian sorbetto, was essentially flavored ice. Water-based. No dairy. The next big leap happens in France and England during the 1600s, when cooks start adding cream, milk, and eggs into the mix. This is the moment ice becomes ice cream, a completely different texture, richer, smoother, closer to what we'd recognize today. One of the earliest written recipes for something resembling modern ice cream shows up in England in the mid-1600s, associated with the royal court of Charles I. Legend has it the recipe was so prized that the king paid his French chef a lifetime pension just to keep it secret, another callback to that guarded, trade secret culture we saw in Italy. By the early 1700s, recipes for cream ices were appearing in published English cookbooks, meaning the secret was finally, officially out. But knowing the recipe was only half the problem. The other half was ice itself, and if you didn't live somewhere with a convenient mountain or a Persian yakshal, keeping ice frozen through summer was a serious challenge. So the wealthy in Europe, and soon America, started building ice houses. These were deep, insulated pits or brick structures, often built into hillsides, packed with ice cut from frozen lakes and rivers during winter, layered with straw or sawdust for insulation. A well-built ice house could keep ice solid well into the following autumn. Owning one wasn't just practical, it was a status symbol. If you had an ice house, you had money, land, and labor to spare. Ice cream, at this point, was still very much a rich person's dessert. And nowhere is that more obvious than in early America. Ice cream shows up repeatedly in the diaries and household records of the Founding Fathers. Benjamin Franklin was known to have encountered and enjoyed ice cream during his travels in France, helping bring an appreciation for it back to the colonies. George Washington took things further. His household expense records from the summer of 1790 show he spent roughly $200 on ice cream in a single season. To put that in perspective, that's an enormous sum for the 1790s, equivalent to thousands of dollars today, on frozen dessert alone. Then there's Dolly Madison, wife of President James Madison, who's often credited with popularizing ice cream at the White House. She reportedly served it at her husband's second inaugural banquet in 1813, supposedly in a bold pink strawberry flavor, turning what had been a rare indulgence into a genuine statement of American refinement and hospitality. Whether or not she was truly the first to serve it there is debated by historians, but her role in making ice cream a fixture of American high society is well documented. So by the end of the 1700s, ice cream has crossed an ocean, ditched the water ice format for something richer, and become a genuine marker of wealth and taste on two continents. But it's still exclusive, still something only the elite can afford. That's about to change completely. For nearly 2,000 years, ice cream had been a rich person's problem to solve. You needed mountains, ice houses, servants, and money. That all changes in the 1800s, and it starts with one American woman and a hand crank. In 1843, Nancy Johnson patented the hand crank freezer, a simple but genuinely brilliant device. It used a bucket packed with ice and salt on the outside, with a smaller canister inside holding the cream mixture, and a hand crank that turned a paddle to churn it as it froze. Before this, making smooth ice cream required constant, skilled manual stirring, the kind of labor-intensive process only wealthy households with servants could manage. Johnson's churn made the process fast, consistent, and, crucially, doable in a regular home kitchen. She sold the patent rights for a modest sum and never got rich off it herself, but the device she created is essentially the ancestor of every home ice cream maker still sold today. This is the moment ice cream stops being a luxury and starts becoming a product. And once it's affordable to make, it needs somewhere to be sold, which is where ice cream parlors and soda fountains come in. Through the mid to late 1800s, these became genuine social institutions in American towns and cities. Pharmacies started installing soda fountains to sell flavored, carbonated drinks, and ice cream fit naturally alongside them. Parlors became one of the few public places where it was socially acceptable for young unmarried men and women to sit together, unchaperoned, which made them enormously popular as informal courting spots. They were also, notably, more racially and socially mixed public spaces than a lot of other venues of the era, which added to their reputation as accessible, democratic gathering places. Now, the cone. You've probably heard the story. The waffle cone was invented on the spot at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, when an ice cream vendor ran out of paper dishes and a nearby waffle vendor rolled up a waffle to save the day. It's a fantastic story. It's also, like Marco Polo, mostly myth. Edible cones and cone-shaped holders actually appear in European recipes and patents decades before 1904. There's a French cookbook from 1825 describing cone-shaped cornets, and an English patent for an edible cone-making mold from 1902, 2 years before the fair. What the 1904 World's Fair almost certainly did do is massively popularize the cone in America. With dozens of vendors selling frozen treats side by side, the cone became the practical, portable answer to, how do I hand someone ice cream without a bowl? So the fair didn't invent the cone, but it's absolutely the reason it went mainstream. And then, in the 1920s, something unexpected supercharges the entire industry: Prohibition. When alcohol became illegal in the U.S. in 1920, breweries, which had massive refrigeration infrastructure, distribution networks, and dairy connections already built for beer, suddenly had no product to sell. A lot of them pivoted hard into ice cream production instead. Yuengling, one of America's oldest breweries, literally opened an ice cream division to survive Prohibition. Anheuser-Busch did something similar. The very infrastructure built for beer, cold storage, trucks, retail relationships, got repurposed almost overnight for dessert, and it accelerated ice cream's transformation into a mass-produced, nationally distributed product. So by the end of the 1800s and into the 1920s, ice cream has gone from something you needed a mountain and a fortune to enjoy, to something a beer company makes in a factory and ships in a truck. The exclusivity is basically gone. What's left is a country falling in love with it, and that sets up the next stage. Ice cream doesn't just become popular, it becomes patriotic. By the time World War II rolls around, ice cream isn't just a treat anymore, it's practically a piece of American identity. And the war is where that identity gets sealed in. During World War II, the U.S. military treated ice cream as a legitimate morale tool, not a joke, an actual strategic decision. The Navy famously converted a concrete barge into a floating ice cream factory in the Pacific in 1945, capable of churning out around 500 gallons every hour, specifically to boost troops' spirits during the brutal island-hopping campaigns. Soldiers overseas would go to serious lengths to get their hands on it. There are accounts of pilots strapping milk and cream containers to their planes so the high-altitude cold would freeze it into ice cream mid-flight. Meanwhile, back home, the government explicitly protected ice cream production even as other foods got rationed, partly because it made for great propaganda. America could still afford dessert, even at war. Compare that to Germany and Japan, where ice cream production was scaled back or halted, and you get a genuinely striking contrast, one side framing a frozen dessert as proof of abundance and resolve. Coming out of the war, that wartime demand explodes into full commercial empires. Good humor had actually started earlier, in the 1920s, when Harry Burt in Ohio dipped a chocolate-covered ice cream bar and stuck it on a wooden stick, creating the ice cream bar as a portable, mess-free product, and building an entire fleet of jingling white trucks to sell it door to door. Baskin-Robbins comes together in 1945, when brothers-in-law Burt Baskin and Irv Robbins merged their separate ice cream shops in California, built around a genuinely radical idea for the time. Instead of offering 2 or 3 flavors, why not dozens? Their 31 flavors concept, one for every day of the month, turned ice cream shopping into an event rather than a purchase. And decades later, in 1978, 2 childhood friends named Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield took a $5 correspondence course on ice cream making and opened a scoop shop in a renovated gas station in Burlington, Vermont. Ben and Jerry's built its entire identity around chunky, unconventional flavors and a countercultural, socially conscious brand, proof that by this point, ice cream wasn't just food, it was personality and marketing. And then there's soft serve, which has one of the messiest origin stories in all of food history. 2 separate claims emerged almost simultaneously in the 1930s. In New York, Tom Carvel supposedly got a flat tire on a hot day in 1934, and rather than lose his melting ice cream stock, sold it soft, straight from the truck. Customers loved it, and he built Carvel around the concept. Meanwhile, in Illinois, J.F. McCullough and his son discovered that ice cream tasted noticeably creamier and better when served before it fully hardened in a conventional freezer, and in 1938 they test-marketed it at a promotion offering all-you-can-eat for 10 cents, reportedly selling over 1,600 servings in 2 hours. That discovery became Dairy Queen. To this day, historians and both companies' fans still argue over who actually got there first, and honestly, there's no clean answer. What is clear is that by the end of the 1930s, soft serve existed, tasted better to a lot of people than hard frozen ice cream, and was about to become a fixture of American roadside culture through the decades that followed. By mid-century, ice cream has gone from ancient royal luxury to industrial empire, trucks, chains, war propaganda, gas station startups. It's completely woven into everyday life. Which just leaves one thing left to talk about, what it all looks like now, and how this ancient obsession with cold, sweet things ended up looking completely different depending on where in the world you are. So here we are, thousands of years, dozens of empires, one guarded Italian secret, a war, and a gas station in Vermont later. And the wildest part is, ice cream never actually settled into one final form. It just kept adapting to wherever it landed. Remember that opening hook, someone in Antarctica eating ice cream, someone in Ahmedabad eating ice cream? That's not an exaggeration, it's basically the whole story of this dessert. In India, that same ancient impulse, cool something down, sweeten it, make it rich, turned into kulfi, a dense, slow-frozen milk dessert flavored with cardamom, pistachio, saffron, made using techniques that genuinely echo those old Persian and Mughal cooling methods from Act I. In Italy, that guarded 1600s trade secret evolved into gelato, churned slower, with less air and less fat than American ice cream, giving it that dense, intensely flavored texture Italy is still famous for. In Japan, the tradition took a completely different turn with mochi ice cream, small balls of ice cream wrapped in soft, pounded rice dough, a fusion that didn't even exist in its modern form until the 1980s in California, of all places, before becoming a global phenomenon. And that's really the through line of this entire story. Ice cream was never really invented once, by one person, in one place. It was reinvented, over and over, by whoever happened to have snow, or sugar, or a spare cow, or a good enough reason to want something cold and sweet badly enough to build an underground desert refrigerator for it. Every culture that touched it left a fingerprint. Persia gave it engineering, the Arab world gave it sugar, Italy gave it secrecy, America gave it a factory and a stick. It's not one dessert with one history. It's basically a mirror, showing you what mattered to whoever was making it, wherever and whenever they were. So next time you're holding a cone, or a cup of kulfi, or a little mochi ball melting in your hand, that's not just dessert. That's a few thousand years of humans refusing to accept that summer had to be miserable. If you learned something today, that's genuinely all I ask for, but a like and a subscribe helps this channel more than you'd think, so if you're new here, consider sticking around, because we're doing this every week with a completely different food. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.